Yes, systems are important. Having a logical flow to solve your problems is important. So let me help you today by giving you some of that flow. My name's Tarab. I make videos about emotional intelligence every day, and strategy is very, very important. The reason being, if we don't have some sort of plan as to how we want to go about building the thing that we're passionate about fixing the thing, about making sure that we are spending the right energy for a project to last the test of time, perhaps build a legacy, we have to have the logical flow of, first and foremost, what is the issue? What is the end goal? I think a lot of people don't realize that when we're in the weeds, when we're in the things that need to get done, we often forget where we're going. We often have to forget where we're going because the weeds are so damn difficult to tackle. And I think from a strategic point of view, it's very, very important, based on how long your goal to achievement is, the time scale is, that you sit down and think about the macro picture, the larger picture, in a consistent, scheduled basis. So for instance, if you're making a club, an organization at a school, you only really have 4 years if you were smart enough to start it at the beginning of your education. Meaning that starting the whole thing, that in itself is going to take a little bit of time, but once you get the e-board instated, once you get the members instated, and once things start flowing, the events, the ideas, the excitement, it's going to be difficult for you to concentratedly sit down and say to yourself, hey, am I setting myself up for success, or am I just going to have too many loose ends by the time I graduate from here? So for instance, in that scenario, when you have 4 years, you want to make sure that you're sitting down about once a month, 2 hours at least, with your team to determine whether or not the trajectory of where you're going is going to be sustainable. The biggest mistake that any leader or any company owner ever makes is not making their system sustainable. It lowers the potential, the use of that system when we leave. And we are going to leave, my friend. It might feel like an eternal bliss, but I promise you, there is going to be a time where you will not be there. So that's all the more reason to actually consider the strategy. So for instance, let's stay with this club membership, because frankly speaking, it can apply to any sort of business, any sort of personal endeavor, whatever it is. So your biggest problem for this club is that you are not getting the right people to come in, the right amount of excitement, the right amount of stamina, endurance in your e-board perhaps. So after creating the organization, you have decided, hey, we need to sit down and have a strategy meeting. Well, the first question of a strategy meeting is, how do we get people more engaged? How do you figure out a way for people to get what they want? Well, I would say that the first step of making that a reality is trying to figure out what the hell they want. Chances are, you being the person, the gracious leader that has put this thing together, there is a list of things that you want out of this organization. And when you get those things, at the very least, you will be satisfied. So what I would do is sit down and write a list of the things that you want. Now, I want to step back for a second in this meeting. There's going to be a lot of ideas, a lot of different interactions, discussions, egos, philosophies, whatever it is, but there needs to be someone, if it's you or a secretary, someone that's taking the notes that need to be taken, not the bullshit notes. The bullshit notes are how people feel and want to be treated. The things that need to happen are actionable notes. So for instance, if the conversation is about how do we get people more involved in our brand, in our club, whatever, the first necessary step is, what do the creators of the club want out of the damn thing? You're human too, you're very much a part of it. And by virtue of creating that opportunity, by virtue of creating that system in which you get what you want, chances are the other people that want those things will also get those things. So writing a list of those things down, making the list accessible after the meeting. Making the list accessible after the meeting is paramount. It's the reason why communication is so highly valued in all of these organizations. Why communication makes all of the difference. Why standard operating procedures are even put into place. For instance, if after the meeting You remember 3 or 4 main points, but you were thinking to yourself, damn, there was that one argument or that one thing that we hit on that I wish I knew about, but I have to go and hit the secretary up in order to access that Google document. Well, my friend, you're already slowing down the process of moving forward. So when in these conversations, when in these systemic meetings, it's very, very important to, first of all, write the stuff down someplace where it is shared with everyone at the meeting, and potentially, if the transparency level is high in your organization, with everyone that is involved in the organization, to increase the amount of trust that we have, thus increasing the amount of engagement, by the way. So, say you wrote these things down, you write down 5 things you want to get out of this club. Okay, cool. Now the next step is, which one is the most important and applicable to the most amount of people? When you narrow that down, that gets isolated, put down, and that is the first initiative that needs to be worked out. That doesn't mean that these 5 need to be forgotten about. And in fact, it's probably a good idea to make sure that those 5 things that you've written down that you want to do are also in their own sections. That perhaps some of them can happen together, in parallel. Perhaps the pipeline, the network that needs to be established is the same network or pipeline. By virtue of writing these things down, organizing them, and having the conversation about the ideas, now we can start to populate some of the things that might be relevant. As you can begin to see, a problem that was very abstract, a problem that was previously very, very difficult to tackle, when broken down to chunks logically, starts to become something that's very actionable and something that's a bit exciting for everyone involved. Now, obviously, the scale that I'm talking about is a little small for some of you watching this, but the same stuff applies. And there are some other things that I would suggest thinking about. In terms of that monthly maintenance meeting that I was discussing earlier, the strategy meeting once a month to make sure the trajectory is correct, there needs to be things that are put into place while the roles are being created, while the different roles of the organization are being created. It should be expected that those roles are also writing down what those roles are expected to do. For instance, you cannot create the job definitions that you are looking for if you have not served that job, if you haven't correctly done the job yourself. There might be a general understanding of what needs to be accomplished, but the minutiae, the details, the intricacies of accomplishing that job are always going to come from the person that's an expert at that job. For instance, in this club scenario, the treasurer. The treasurer of the club is responsible for, in a macro sense, from my understanding, is how much money is coming into the club, how much money is being allocated to certain resources in the club, and what exactly are the guidelines for determining whether or not something is relevant to perhaps the goals, the expectations of the club. Right? The treasurer needs to be someone that's not only just keeping the numbers, but also making sure to remind the people trying to spend the money or trying to make the money that, hey, perhaps this is not the best thing to spend our money on because it doesn't align with our goals, our value statements, the things that we've said we're going to do. Now, the details of understanding that is going to be something that the treasurer knows. For instance, what is the account username and password that allows you to log in to see how much money that is? How do you break down the things that the money is being spent on? Right? Are these things being categorized in any way? Is it something that doesn't even have a name and that it needs to be backtracked and needs to be talked to with the person spending the money what that specific thing was? And on top of that, what is the math that needs to be done in order to determine how much monthly spending is allowed? Perhaps how much monthly revenue is being generated by that organization through membership fees, whatever. How often is that treasurer checking that account per month? right? So these are all details that need to be hammered out. Otherwise, the communication starts to suffer. The progress of the whole machine starts to suffer. And I promise you, after a number of months, it shows. After years in particular, it will begin to show. In that when the old treasurer is translating out for the new treasurer to come in, the new treasurer doesn't really know exactly the specifics. They need to be trained on every single little thing. They need to be trained on the flow, the expectation. So the reason that I say that it's so very important to think about scale, time, and goals is because we need to understand that a system that works properly has parts that interchange, has parts that move in and out. And in order for us to know the size, the shape, the complexity of that part, the part before it needs to be analyzed very closely. So, problem solving when it comes to immediate needs tends to be a little bit easier because the time scale is smaller. Problem solving for larger needs, growth in general, scale, tends to be a little bit more difficult because it's a larger chunk of time, and by virtue of that, there's a lot more variables that come into play. Now, if you're someone that has an organization, if you have a company that you're looking to scale, if you are trying to figure out how to plan your various cousins' weddings, whatever it is, I'm a systems guy. And frankly, I like thinking about this stuff all of the time. And I try to create things that once I step in and I give you that solution, that it will last you beyond perhaps our immediate communication. So if you're interested in that type of thing, please DM me below, go on Instagram, or email me at tarabify@gmail.com. And I'd love to have a 30-minute call. I'd love to even give you some free game for the problem that you're tackling. And if it works, let's work together. But for most part, I really advocate for thinking about things logically. Do not get stuck in personalities. Don't get stuck in personal philosophies. Really try to think about what it is that you're trying to accomplish and make sure that the meetings are well recorded and make sure that they nail every single little part of what you're trying to get done. And remember, trust. Progress moves at the speed of trust. And trust is necessarily established by time and consistency. Actualize your potential catalyst. I hope this helped you. Take care of yourself. And if you have a second, check out this video. Peace.